This question comes from Romilia, and she says, how does intermittent fasting fit into a marathon training program? Is this something that can be beneficial or detrimental to peak event performance and optimal training?
Yeah, we actually have been getting a lot of questions lately about intermittent fasting, so glad we have a chance to ask you about this.
Absolutely. So I've been there for all the trends, and they all have a scientific element. But I mean, it was in the late 80s and 90s. It was all about calorie control, which kind of gave way to the low fat thing, and then it was the low carb thing, and then it was the all natural thing, which I really liked, and then vegan and vegetarian. Then it swung all the way the other way, paleo and ketogenic. And now the most common thing that I'm asked about is, what about intermittent fasting?
Hmm.
And my answer is the same as it was to all the other kind of trends and things that became hot, is they all have science behind them. It's a matter of understanding the tool and how it works with your physiology. So I will say this, a marathon runner is not the first person I would think of when I'm correlating to that particular tool. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't have clients that don't implement a measure of it. But here's the basics that you want to be aware of. Some people will say that they're intermittent fasting for digestive health. And if you take a day where you're giving your digestive system a rest, great. And anybody can do that regardless of their sport. Truth be told, 98% of people who ask me about it may mention that, but actually what they simply want is a way to lose weight. And so understand the mechanic behind intermittent fasting. Yes, there is some science around the window and the timing of the meals. That is on my list of tools you can implement, but it's very much secondary. If you're doing intermittent fasting and losing weight, it is because you've reduced your calorie intake or your carbohydrate intake. Maybe the effect is heightened because of the window you're eating within. But I promise you, if you eat more calories and carbohydrates, even within that window, it's not going to have the same effect. So now as a runner, what's optimal for you? Now, anything is possible. Anything is possible, but optimal for you is, I want you to fuel for performance with more calories, more carbohydrates, when possible. That's for two reasons. One, to speed your metabolism. So if we do enter a fat burning cycle, your body's in the best position to do so. And two, because generally speaking, more fuel equals more performance, more recovery, more opportunity to see yourself excel. So generally, we're going to look at the timing of your runs, and we're going to want you to have fuel before, fuel after, fuel throughout the day. Otherwise, what could happen is you're stuck eating a giant meal all at once, or one or two really big meals, and particularly for endurance athletes, digestive stress becomes an issue. You ever try and do a long run on a full stomach, it just doesn't work particularly well. And you're not the only ones. When I have like competitive athletes on race day, they have to eat just really small meals at a time because of nerves. They're really nervous going into any sport. This is across the board. So I have to give them small throughout the day. That said, here's how you can implement some measure of cyclical fasting. Figure out what time of day you're going to have your greatest effort, and then position more of your fuel at that time of day. All things being equal, go lighter at the beginning of your day, but towards the end of your day. Because then if you are going to go into a fasting cycle, let's let it be fasting going into you resting, not the other way around. Not resting going into activity fasted, where now you're not going to have as much fuel, which could lead to having to over supplement during your runs. So there are some ways. There's a lot of people that try and give themselves 2 or 3 hours before bed of not eating. That's a great strategy that even athletes can implement if they're running earlier in the day. A lot of people will taper their carbohydrates, with the majority of their carbs being at breakfast and lunch, and then tapering from mid-afternoon snack on. That's a great way of implementing a level of intermittent fasting using the same mechanic, but sidestepping some of the potential pitfalls associated with it.
I was just going to say that I feel like sometimes the intermittent fasting windows tend to be like skipping breakfast, and maybe it comes in at noon or something. And so if a person trains in the morning, I feel like they are not replenishing from that effort, and it can cause more stress on their body, especially women of childbearing age. And that can actually raise cortisol levels over time, which destabilizes hormones. So it can kind of be a double-edged sword. You have to use it very, very carefully if you're in specific groups of, how your metabolism is responding.
Yeah, that's right. It can be. And like I said though, I don't view any strategy as good or bad. It's just a matter of application. In fact, I have a client that I have him implement a measure of intermittent fasting, but there's a very good reason why. So in his case, he's just one of those people with a ravenous appetite. He was waking up at 5:30 in the morning, eating breakfast, training, needing to eat a snack, a second snack, and then lunch, and then normal rest of his day. And he just had this ravenous appetite. I asked him, and not everybody can do this, but in this case, he wasn't seeing the weight loss he wanted. So we purposefully moved his training to right after lunch, early afternoon. And so because of that, he got to sleep in a little bit more in the morning. We bumped his breakfast back. We had him go a little lighter first half of the day. And in his case, that kind of fasting window worked out. But see, there was a very specific strategy, and it allowed us to strategically control his caloric content in his case, or his macronutrient ratios, et cetera, et cetera. But most people are a little confused because there's so many different, you hear intermittent fasting, well, what is that? Is that just not eating breakfast? Is that only eating, between 10 and 6 o'clock at night? Is it not eating on Tuesdays and Fridays? See, there's a lot of different ways to implement it. So the key is you really want to know what's going to work with your body, and understand the major facets that are going to trigger. In this case, if we're talking about fat loss, it's going to be some level of caloric restriction, carbohydrate reduction, or combination of macronutrient ratios that are going to put you in a position for fat loss, and those you can accomplish without going to extremes.